Okay. All right, we are live. We've got attendees coming in. So first of all, for those of you just entering, if you can hear me and if you can see me, go ahead and put a yes in the chat. Excellent. Beautiful. Welcome, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to another Leader Factor webinar. If you are joining us again and you've been to Leader Factor webinars in the past, welcome back. If it's your first time, welcome. We're excited to have you today. Thank you for spending an hour with us on your Friday. There are a lot of things that you could be doing today, and we very much appreciate your attendance and the fact that you would choose to spend 60 minutes with us. So next thing I would love to see in the chat is your location. Let us know where you are from, where you're located, and let us know something that you're grateful for this week. If everybody could do that, that would be fantastic. We love to start webinars out with something like that, see what's going on in people's lives. It's a great way to just connect. We've got people from all over the place: Connecticut, Montreal, Cambridge, Calgary, Canada, Boston,
Hamburg,
Ireland, Brazil.
Junior, we need to learn how to say hello in a lot more languages, I think.
I know at this point, probably like 30.
Yeah.
Pennsylvania, Hola, Indiana, Sao Paulo, Edmonton, Texas, Pittsburgh. Excellent. Got a new position. Congratulations, Len. Grateful for family. Got a lot of family in there this week. Chris Goodwin, Ontario, baby. Love it. Reed, great to have you here. Sandra, Manitoba, Canada. Jared, grateful for some time to learn. You and me both. You know what? It's been a crazy week, and I'm glad to have an hour to learn with you guys.
Lagos, Nigeria. Welcome.
I don't know that we've had Lagos before.
That's fantastic.
That might be a new one. Tim, what's something that you're grateful for this week?
I am grateful for the opportunity to connect with people from all over the world.
Yeah. It's a pretty neat thing, isn't it? We've got so many countries represented, people from all over, and not least, we've got Mark West, who's grateful for his PS4. Mark, I hope that you can get the PS5. That's great. I love it. Well, welcome everybody. Thank you again for being here. Today's webinar is on transforming your culture through psychological safety. It's going to be a very interesting topic. We've been talking about psychological safety the last few webinars, and we're going to put a little spin and talk about some of the EPIC methodology that I think a lot of you will find interesting, something that probably we haven't talked about in a webinar before, and yet something that's very core to what Leader Factor is and some of our roots. And so it's going to be fun to go back to some of that stuff that's based on some of Tim's authorship. And Tim, Dr. Timothy Clark, is our host today. And I have the pleasure of introducing him. He is also the author of The 4 Stages of Psychological Safety and Epic Change. So Tim is an Oxford-trained social scientist who's been doing research in this area, both change management and psychological safety, for several decades, as well as instrument design in psychological safety and emotional intelligence. So if you haven't had a chance to read The 4 Stages, I would highly recommend it. It's an easy read. It's pretty quick, and it's been incredibly well received this year. And so if you haven't had a chance to pick it up, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, anywhere books are sold, you can check it out. Highly recommend it, as well as Epic Change. Epic Change is a little bit more dense. For those of you interested in change management, I cannot recommend this book enough. I would recommend that as well. So with that, Tim, I will kick it over to you to kind of go through our agenda and tell us what we're going to be doing today.
Thanks, Junior. And we welcome Junior as a co-host. We're grateful to be together. We love these opportunities to be with you. It's amazing the level of, I guess, intimacy that you can really achieve in a webinar, even when you're not voice to voice. It's ironic. I never thought that could happen, but it really does happen. So the agenda for today is we're going to talk about how to transform a culture with psychological safety. We're going to begin with the principle that we call behave until you believe. And we're going to talk about the epic stages of change. the 4 stages of psychological safety, creating early wins, and then avoiding what we call a regression to the mean, which is a failure pattern where you snap back, you go back to old ways, you go back to the old equilibrium, and you're not able to consolidate your gains. We've all been there, right? Okay, so let's begin with some polling questions. Junior, do you want to pull these down for us?
You betcha. Let's go with number 1 here.
Yeah.
Is your
Oh, you go ahead. You go
Is
ahead.
your organization currently trying to change its culture? You should get that pop-up window. Looks like we got a lot of responses already. Go ahead and throw that in there. And then I'll give that a few seconds, and then we'll report out on that. It's really neat that we've got an audience large enough to get what would probably be statistically significant data. So I love rolling these polls out. Okay, let's give you 5 seconds. 3, 2, 1, and we'll end that, and I will go ahead and share the results with you.
Wow. Hey, does that surprise you? So 3 out of 4 of you are in the midst of an attempt to change your culture. That's incredible. That's incredible. So this is not an unusual thing. This is not a rare thing. This is not something that we do once in a while. Most of you are engaged in this kind of a transition or transformation, or at least you're trying to right now. Okay,
Yep.
so there's a baseline for us. All right. Junior, should we go to the next one?
Absolutely. Is psychological safety a current priority in your organization? Let's see what you have to say. Same thing, go ahead and throw your response into the poll, and I'll give that maybe 10 seconds and we'll report out. And I can tell you now that the response on this one's a little bit different.
Yeah.
Go ahead and take a guess at what you think it is. Throw it in the chat and we'll see how many of you are close. And I'll give you 5 seconds.
Yeah, and then when you see the results on this question, I would ask you to form a hypothesis about why the data look this way. Why are we seeing these results?
Okay, check this out.
Wow.
Soul got it exactly right. 50-50. It is actually exactly 50-50.
It's unbelievable.
That's funny.
Why is it 50-50?
Yeah, what do you guys think?
What do you think? Here's my hypothesis. A big hypothesis is that psychological safety is still a concept that we are learning about.
Yeah.
That many people don't understand very well.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I would say.
I think that's some of the general sentiment in the chat too, that it's in its infancy.
Yeah.
Not in its reality. It's always existed. It's always been a thing.
Yeah.
But in the sense that organizations are beginning to understand it at a deeper level.
Yeah.
And we're beginning to put some definition to it, which is why we're so excited about our contribution to this category with a stage-based model. That we'll talk about. But I think that's really interesting that people are saying, look, it's really not been grasped yet in its entirety in a really widespread way.
Yeah. Well, and for those of you who may not know the history, psychological safety was really coined by Warren Bennis and Edgar Schein at MIT in 1965.
Yeah.
But the research was slow to progress. And then really in the last 2 years, it has exploded. And what do you think the pandemic has done? It's only emphasized the need for psychological safety. So
yeah, it's become much more acute. So I'm going to go ahead and stop the share on these results, and let's move into poll 3.
Okay.
I'll bring that down. Okay, I'm going to launch this poll using a scale from 1 to 10, where 1 is low and 10 is high. How would you rate the overall level of psychological safety in your organization? So 1 would be completely psychologically unsafe, and 10 would be completely safe.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. This is the most interesting question of all, at least in my opinion.
I agree. And as I'm seeing the data come in, I think we will probably all agree that this is pretty interesting. So I'll go ahead and give this 5 more seconds. If you haven't yet, go ahead and throw your response on that poll, and we'll report out on this one. Some of you statisticians might be interested in this data. Okay,
yeah, this distribution is fascinating.
It is. So I'm going to go ahead and share the results with everyone. Go ahead and take a look at this, everybody. What does this look like? Standard bell curve. Kind of interesting.
Very, very close to a standard distribution, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Very, very close.
We've got, I mean, probably 85% inside 4, 5, 6, and 7. Maybe
Wow.
not quite that much, but it's interesting too that we've got a tail, right? And the 10, we have very few responses at 9 and 10,
Yeah.
and we have some significant response in the 1, 2, 3, and 4,
Well,
right?
you got 11% in 1 and 2, and you've got 6% in 9 and 10.
Yeah.
So fascinating distribution, pretty normal, but skewed a little bit to the lower end.
Yeah, Edwina, I hope I'm getting your name right. Makes a great point in the chat. We're probably biased here as we're interested in the subject and are likely to be early adopters.
Good point.
Yeah, it's a good point.
Very good point. Yeah. Yeah.
Awesome. Thanks for
There's
your
an,
comments, guys. And I
you
want to
know,
just reiterate, if you've got something to share, put it in the chat.
yeah, there's some really good insight here. Really, really good insight. I can't remember who said it because it's scrolling so fast, but someone said the smaller the organization, it probably tends to, you're probably going to have a higher score. Maybe. I
Hmm.
don't know for sure,
Hmm.
but it's an interesting hypothesis.
And certainly there's going to be tremendous difference between teams, even inside the same organization, right?
Yeah.
And we talk about this all the time. Structurally, you could have two identical teams with very different levels of psychological safety.
Yeah. Fantastic. Okay. Let's keep going. Okay, so let's go to this principle that we call behave until you believe. I want you to think about something. If you learn about inclusion, if you learn about psychological safety, if you learn about shedding your bias and your prejudice, that's wonderful. Awareness helps, education helps, appreciation helps, but you still may never get to where you need to be. So how do we move organizations to high levels of psychological safety? Well, we can focus on awareness and understanding and appreciation, but oftentimes we will hit the wall and we won't get there. And so this is where we bring in the principle of behaving until you believe, because in many ways and in many things in life, you have to actually do it in order to generate the confirming evidence that it works and it's the right thing to do. And so we want to focus on this principle as you think about how you're going to transform your organizations or participate in that process. I want you to think about this principle. There are many people, the only way they're going to be convinced, and the only way that you're going to make real sustainable progress is you have to get them behaving differently. And then there will be some confirming evidence that comes. Junior, would you talk about the example that we were talking about earlier this week with the gentleman that would just take over and commandeer the meeting?
Yeah, absolutely. So, as you'd imagine, at Leader Factor, we have an opportunity to work with a lot of leaders. And this particular leader was struggling in psychological safety with his team. And one of the things that would happen all the time is he had this very domineering tendency to go into a meeting and take hold right out the gate of his idea, his point of view, what was going to happen, and then solicit feedback afterward and say, yeah, does anyone else have any ideas? And as you can imagine, the team was silent at that point, and there would not be very much contribution. And so we try to convey this principle of collaboration and the rich ideas that exist amongst a diverse team. And he's like, oh, I don't know. I don't know if I really buy into that. I think I have the right answer going into this. And we said, well, okay, well, let's just do an experiment. Okay. So we were not going to shift him to belief and conviction right off the bat. So we said, okay, next time we enter the meeting, what you're going to do is one thing: weigh in last. That's it. You're going to weigh in last. You're going to pose a question and then let the team do its thing. Let the team churn through the ideas, work through the work. And then at the very end, if you have something to say, then you can share it then.
Yeah.
And over time, as he incorporated this practice, he started seeing these really good ideas. The team kind of came out of its shell. They would engage with each other, put good ideas on the table because he was allowing the team to do its thing. And so that generated, as Tim said, all of this confirming evidence, right? That he's now seeing the fruit of weighing in last and the level of psychological safety increasing. And now comes that conviction. So we couldn't force it at the beginning, but after you have all of this confirming evidence, it's impossible to deny the fact that you have better ideas and better outcomes.
But Junior, it was one behavioral change, right?
Yeah, just a
Focusing
single
on
thing.
one concrete behavior that opened the door.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
to that point, Ben, if you'll go ahead. So Ben's a member of our team at Leader Factor and monitoring the chat. Ben, throw the behavioral guide link into the chat. So you guys will provide that for free. It's 140 behaviors that have to do with each stage of psychological safety. Weigh in last is just one of those. So if you're interested in just some practical things that you can do, that's a resource that we've made for you.
Yeah. So as you think about changing a culture, how do you change a culture? Well, you have two levers. You have two levers to pull for culture change. Number one is your modeling behavior. For example, what Junior just talked about with the executive who finally learned to weigh in last instead of to hijack or commandeer the meeting. So that's the modeling behavior. The other lever is accountability, holding people accountable to the standard, whatever the standard is, whatever the behavioral norm is that you would like to establish. So there's modeling, and then there's reinforcement through accountability. There are other things that we can do, right? But everything else is support. Everything else is scaffolding. These two levers will always be your fundamental levers. So leaders, they lead with modeling and accountability. What do the rest of us do? How do we participate in that cultural change, that cultural transformation process? Here's what we do. Everybody else, we observe the modeling behavior. And we're always observing. So we observe, and then we can practice, and then we can get feedback, and then we can do it again in a learning cycle. So observation, practice, and feedback. I love this statement from Albert Bandura. Most human behavior is learned observationally through modeling from observing others. And that really is a capsule summary of Professor Bandura's work as a psychologist. So we model, and then the rest of us, we can observe, practice, get a feedback loop going, do it again. Now, I want to share an example with you from my personal life. And here's my premise. Psychological safety doesn't neutralize differences. It acknowledges and appreciates them. As a young boy, I grew up in Colorado, and my father was a teacher among the Navajo. The Navajo, as you may know, they represent the second largest Native American tribe, second only to the Cherokee. And as a child, we lived among the Navajo. And even as a young child, I learned some things. I perceived some things. Number one, the Navajo accepted us, and they included us, and they invited us into their society. I felt that very keenly, very strongly. I also realized that there were some big differences. I realized as a child that I was not Navajo. I did not speak Navajo, and the customs were very, very different. But the psychological safety did not neutralize those differences. It highlighted, it accentuated, it appreciated those differences. That's what psychological safety can do. And so I just want to make that point early on in our discussion today, because sometimes people, they feel that psychological safety, they don't understand it, and they feel that it's going to threaten some of the attributes of their identity.
Mm.
that it may try to erase some of the differences. It doesn't do that at all. It's quite the opposite. It acknowledges those differences, right? Junior, anything to add there?
I think one of the things to add here is one of the things that we see all the time working when we do work in the DEI space is the difference between diversity and inclusion. And we talk about this in the book, but diversity is different than inclusion, and diversity doesn't mean inclusion. Diversity is makeup and composition. There are real differences. Inclusion is behavioral. And so that's something that very interesting that I find when we're talking about these types of differences. The differences don't go away, and we want to strive for diversity, diversity in thought, diversity in opinion, diversity in makeup. But it's these behaviors. We need to move from theory to practice very quickly, or we're not going to get there.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Okay, so we're going to shift into the transformation process. What does the transformation process look like? Let me introduce you to what we call the epic stages of change. The epic stages of change, they reflect the actual empirical stages that a successful transformation goes through. So we have stage one is evaluation. Evaluation is we're looking inside the organization, we're looking outside the organization. We're trying to figure out if we have a change imperative that we need to pursue. So at the end of evaluation, there's a go, no go decision. If we say, yes, we're going forward, we need to pursue this change, we need to make this change, then we have approval for that. That transitions us to stage two, which is preparation. In preparation, we get ready for the change. We start communicating, we start building a coalition, we start planning, we start figuring out what resources we need, we start identifying our milestones and our metrics. That's all stage two. Then we launch, and launch is the transition event that takes us to stage three, implementation. And stage three implementation means we're doing the change. We are executing the change. At the end of implementation, sometimes we think we're done. And we make a big mistake there, because often at the end of implementation, we see the results that we were after, that we wanted. And so we think that we're done because the results are there. But there's a deception in there. Behaviorally, we have the results. Culturally, we don't. The change still has to root itself into the cultural soil of the organization. That's what consolidation is all about. Consolidation is the last stage. It's where you bring the change together, you make it strong, you make it stick. It now moves into the values and the assumptions and the prevailing norms of the organization. Because as you know, with change, when we begin, we rock the organization out of its state of equilibrium, we transition, and then we go back to a state of equilibrium, hopefully, and we are able to consolidate the gains that we have made. So that's an overview of the epic stages. Now, change management is a very difficult, it's a complex, difficult discipline. No wonder people fail. Here's why. Here's a way to think about it. It's an applied discipline that you simultaneously perform at three levels: a strategic level, right? The big picture, and then a tactical level. We're getting things done at a tactical level. And then finally at an interpersonal level. And so think about it. You're a strategist at level one. Sometimes you feel like a grief counselor and a triage nurse at level three. And then there's everything in between. Think about how hard this is. Now, one more thing I want to add here. In large-scale organizational change, we usually have work streams or change initiatives in three areas: strategy transformation, culture transformation, and operations transformation. Now, sometimes we pursue changes that really straddle all three, but a cultural transformation, you'll see that work stream in the middle. Guess what? That's the hardest one. That's the hardest work stream for organizational change management. Why is that? Go to your chat box. Why is the culture transformation the hardest? We'd like to hear from you on this. We believe it's the hardest. Maybe that's your experience, but why? Why is it the hardest one out of the three? What are your thoughts on this?
People don't like changing. People in all caps.
People.
People. Because most people don't like change. We're talking about people here. So it seems like there's some consensus in the
Okay.
chat.
Okay.
Habits are hard to change. Baggage, culture is deeply embedded. These are all true. Culture is based on beliefs and habits. It's very personal. It feels like a loss. Jen says trauma. Finesse says changing minds. Laurie, top level needs to buy in. Connie, those two. Oh man, I'm losing it, guys. You're too fast.
Wow.
These are all great. These are all great. Change is risky. That's true. Fear. It takes more than a lever or a switch. Isn't that true? We often think about it as a lever or a switch. Like you just
I like this.
change.
Michael says, culture is your comfort blanket.
Mm,
And so we're taking your blanket away from you.
mm.
Yeah,
I like that.
it's good. Beliefs and biology. Thanks, Jen. Yeah, that's good. Very good. Fear and loss. Kim, very good.
Aaron, culture doesn't bring in money. That's a really interesting point.
It really,
That's a really interesting point.
it is, isn't it?
And I think we have, more and more ammo to argue with that as time goes on, right?
Maybe not directly,
Sure.
but we can measure it pretty indirectly these days. And I
Yeah.
think that's giving us a lot more credibility for culture change. Okay. So you go to the organization and you say, we want to change the culture. We want to transform the culture. What is your case? Right? What case are you going to make? Because when we make a case for change, we have to tie it to some drivers. And these are the drivers of change. Number one, cost reduction, right? Number two, value, to increase or enhance value in some way. And the third category that drives change is a combination of compliance, safety, and security. Table stakes to play the game. So when you're trying to justify and build a case for culture change, it becomes hard, especially based on what we just talked about. Can you show me an ROI? What is the return on investment here? And this is where we struggle. It's very difficult, right? And I think we're all acknowledging this. But this is changing because culture eventually leads to impact. And we're going to talk a little bit about how this works, especially through the lens of psychological safety. With psychological safety, you have a lot more ammunition than you've ever had. So we're going to talk about that. Okay. So what is psychological safety? We can define psychological safety in 5 words: an environment of rewarded vulnerability. That's what we're trying to create. And what we're saying is there's a massive return on investment if you can create this kind of environment. Now, first blush, people will argue with you. People may disagree, but then we break it down and the case becomes a little more clear. So let's break it down into what we call the 4 stages of psychological safety. To create an environment of rewarded vulnerability, we have to increase psychological safety. Psychological safety, and I'm going to annotate here a little bit, is a function of respect and permission. It's the intersection, it's the fusion of these 2 dimensions. And there's a progression. There are 4 stages of psychological safety that mirror the natural stages of human needs and also at the same time climb a ladder of increasing vulnerability. So stage 1 is inclusion safety. Inclusion safety means you feel included, accepted, and you have a sense of belonging. That's the foundation. Inclusion, safety. Inclusion is the backbone of culture. If you don't create this foundation of inclusion, you don't pass go. You're not going anywhere. So let me say that again. Inclusion is the backbone of culture. It's the foundation. After inclusion safety, we go to stage 2, which is learner safety. Learner safety means you can engage in the learning process, the discovery process, and you won't be embarrassed or marginalized or punished. You can ask questions, give and receive feedback, experiment, even make mistakes, and you're going to thrive in the environment. Then we go to stage 3, contributor safety. Contributor safety means you can take what you have learned and use it. You can apply it. All the experience, knowledge, skills, you have something to do with it. You have meaningful work. You can make a contribution. You can make a difference. You can see that that's a natural sequence, right? There's a natural instinct to, once you learn, to be able to use what you've learned. So that's stage 3. Then we go to stage 4, challenger safety. Challenger safety is the culminating stage. It's the last stage. It means that you feel safe to challenge the status quo, and there's not going to be retribution or retaliation. The environment, the culture supports you in that behavior. Now you can see that as you move all the way to stage 4, you've increased your personal vulnerability. Now we've done global survey research to confirm this sequence. 94% of employees worldwide say that challenging the status quo is the single riskiest behavior in the organization. That's why challenger safety is stage 4. It's not somebody's opinion. It's the universal pattern across nations and demographics. Junior, any comments here?
Well, and on the flip side of that, what is the least vulnerable? Inclusion safety. And what is the first thing that most of you want to do when you enter a new social situation, a new social setting, a new social collective? You want to see if you're going to be included, right? And certainly challenging the direction of the organization is less risky, or certainly more risky than introducing yourself, for example.
Yeah.
And so we had a few questions in the chat, are these sequential? Yes. Not in every single case, but the overwhelming pattern is absolutely yes, they are.
Yeah.
Even if you come in as subject matter expert, for example, you're not going to come in immediately into contributor safety. You still need to feel out what's going on. You may be inserted into a team. You still need to learn the culture of the team. You need to learn the context in which you're going to be working. And so if you think about your own life, and I think about mine in the situations, that I find myself in the social collectives of which I'm a part. And in almost every case, I can see, oh man, maybe at the beginning there was a little inhibition on my part, right? I'm part of a new team. I've got some new colleagues, and that's really what I'm concerned about at the beginning is, hey, I'm Junior, and it's nice to meet you, and you're trying to feel things out, and am I going to be included?
Yeah.
Am I going to get a seat at the table? And then over time, the rapport develops and you learn, and now you've learned enough to contribute. And eventually, hopefully the situation allows and promotes challenging.
Yeah.
And so that's certainly been my experience.
So Junior, let's talk a little bit about where this goes off track and where we have some failure patterns.
Yeah,
So let's
absolutely.
the first failure pattern, which is paternalism. Now, notice the combination. Respect is relatively high, right? And permission on average is lower. And that's the combination for paternalism: high respect level, lower permission level. So you're being treated, your helicopter parent is telling you, I love you, I value you, I respect you, don't touch anything. That's paternalism.
Yeah.
And we see this in organizations. Well-meaning, well-intentioned people, benevolent, good people, they exhibit patterns of paternalism where they put people on short leashes. They respect them, but they don't let them do what they are capable of doing. They don't understand leadership. They don't understand how to empower people, right?
Hmm.
So let me ask you, have you ever worked for a paternalistic boss or leader?
Yeah. How did it go for you?
How was that?
Or how is that?
Or
You
how
don't
is
need to
that?
put that,
Maybe
you don't need to put that in the chat, but if you've had an experience,
yeah.
certainly.
If it's present tense, just make it past tense and
There you go.
we'll be okay. Uh, but that probably is happening to some of you right now.
So Michael asks, doesn't boss imply low permission? That's interesting.
Yeah.
That's
Okay.
interesting.
I wish it didn't.
I
It
know.
perhaps does for some people,
Yeah.
right? Um,
Kim says language matters.
yeah,
Lori says powerless. I think that, yeah, a lot of people feel this.
yeah. So a lot of us have been there. I've been there.
Yeah.
So that's paternalism, and that's one of the failure patterns that we see in organizations. Now, here's another one. Here's the second failure pattern, which is exploitation. Junior, do you want to talk about exploitation?
Yeah, so notice the combination. So remember the axes, right? Y-axis, respect. Permission is x-axis. So we're looking at a combination of relatively low respect and relatively high permission. And in this stage, or this failure pattern, we're being told, I don't value you, but I value what you can do for me. And so I'll allow you to participate because that's valuable to me. And so we see exploitative tendencies and patterns all over the place. If you can think of any, go ahead and throw them in the chat. What sort of exploitation do you see? And it's important to note that exploitation is certainly a spectrum. There
Yeah.
can be very subtle forms of exploitation that are only mildly exploitative. And on the other side, at the other pole, we have very overt exploitation that unfortunately also happens and much more frequently than we would like.
Yeah.
So, people taking credit for something you did, excellent comment. Ryan Stevenson, call centers. Is I mean, that is absolutely true. We see that a lot, and it's not necessarily true, but it could be a pattern in some environments like that.
Yeah.
Long hours, no acknowledgement or reward. Sounds like very narcissistic. It absolutely can be. Underrepresented employees doing lots of work and not being acknowledged. Unnecessary deadlines. Low reward for work done.
Yeah.
We've all experienced some level of this. I'm fairly certain 99% of us have experienced some sort of exploitation in our lives, and it doesn't feel very good, does it? It's debilitating. Little to no respect of boundaries and time.
Yeah.
That is one that I see being encroached upon all the time, is time and boundaries.
Yeah. So I I just it's scrolling so fast, but someone said their boss came and dropped off a bunch of work during COVID,
Mm,
and it was just really inappropriate, right?
mm,
And so we are seeing that.
yeah.
And we have different terms of engagement now, and we have to learn. We're adapting. We are in transition right now during this pandemic. We are learning how to cultivate teams and organizations with psychological safety in this environment, and it's not easy.
Yeah.
But we have to
And
be careful to avoid some of these patterns of exploitation that are subtle or mild, right, Junior?
absolutely. And that's something that I want to just mention as a point of reflection for all of us. It's pretty easy for all of us to point out these situations that have been, paternalistic or exploitative, and so and so did this and so did this. But how have we done these types of things ourselves, maybe in really subtle ways? That's something that is important for all of us to do, myself included, is look at our interactions with people. And is there a subtle form of manipulation or exploitation? Do we have a pattern that's maybe less than desirable? I think that a model like this should make us all pause and say, what's my tendency? What's my pattern? What am I doing, and what sort of environment am I fostering, for my team or my peers and colleagues? And another important point, this is not just work. This is life. We're talking about life. We're talking about groups of friends. We're talking about families. Any social collective of which you're a part, the four stages model applies. And it's not cut and dry. It's not hard and fast. All of these things are spectrums, right? It's not going to be easily delineated in every case, but I think it does give us an opportunity to reflect and see where we're at.
Really good point, Junior. Let's use this as a mirror,
Yeah.
and hopefully a clean mirror. So wipe it clean and take crack yourselves open, take a hard look inside. And what are the tendencies or the patterns that we need to change? We need to
Yep.
be self-reflective, and that takes courage. There's no doubt. I've certainly made mistakes in these areas, and it's a continuous process. It really is, isn't it?
Yeah. Last thing I'll mention, and then we'll move on. If you want to do a deeper dive on these stages, there's a free resource, leaderfactor.com/blog. We've done specific webinars on each stage and the failure patterns. So inside those blog posts, you can find links to those webinars that are and time-stamped and all of the graphics and all that stuff. So if you're interested in doing a deeper dive, that's a free resource for you.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. Where we eventually want to get to is we want the highest level of psychological safety possible. And what that looks like is this: intellectual friction goes really high and social friction stays really low. That is the sign that you are working with a world-class team. There's this incredible tolerance for candor. There's creative abrasion. There's constructive dissent. You can have hard-hitting dialogue. Ideas are colliding and rubbing against each other. And that's exactly what we need. We need that in order to create deeply inclusive and innovative teams and organizations. So this is just kind of a visual representation of what we are striving for. It's not easy, but some teams are doing this, and it's pretty electric. It's pretty amazing to see what can be done. Okay, so how do you transform the culture with psychological safety? You've got to create some early wins. Remember what Junior said in his example about the senior leader who had hijacked the meeting, and then he learned to weigh in last. One behavioral change is a signal. It signals the organization. You can't tackle everything all at once. It's not possible. You're going to dilute your efforts, and you're going to have a regression to the mean. You're not going to sustain the change. So the principle that we need to focus on is creating early wins. So that takes us to what we call broken window theory. And many of you probably are familiar with this body of theory that was pioneered by James Q. Wilson and his colleagues. And what they found is that if you could create momentum with a certain behavior, then that momentum would build. Now, one of the examples that they took was that if you went to a blighted urban area, right, that had been kind of that was run down, maybe even abandoned, if you picked up a rock and you threw it and you broke a window in a warehouse or an apartment or a building in a blighted urban area, and there were no other windows broken in this particular area, if you came back 2 weeks later, what would you see? Go ahead and go to your chat box to answer the question. What would you see if you came back 2 weeks later and you were the first one that picked up the first rock and broke the first window? You came back 2 weeks later, what would you see? Can you guess?
A well-ventilated warehouse.
Well said. Yes,
Yeah.
you would have a well-ventilated warehouse. There would be many broken windows. And the reason is because if you broke a window and the window stayed broken, no one came to repair it. It sent a very clear signal, a very clear message that it's okay that this window is broken. And so the community absorbs that message. That's a negative chain reaction. But what they found is that they could harness the power in a positive way and create a positive chain reaction, right? Let me give you a case study. New York City between 1995 and 2000. What was the overall big goal? To dramatically reduce serious crime. And so, how did they start? They started with these seemingly insignificant measures. We're going to put collars on taxi drivers. We're going to remove squeegee men from the intersections, graffiti from the subway cars, create no honk zones, ticket pet owners who leave evidence. Now, these measures in and of themselves, they're not very substantive. But what are they? They're symbolic. They have symbolic importance. They send a clear signal that we are leaving the status quo and we're moving and we're going someplace else. That's what concrete, specific behaviors can do. So let's apply this logic and this body of research. So let's think about stage one, inclusion safety. If you were to pick a very specific concrete behavior that would send signals to the rest of the organization that we are moving toward a higher level of psychological safety, but just for inclusion safety, just stage one, what would it be? Go to your chat box. Let's get some examples of concrete behaviors that could help us create more inclusion safety.
Tim says, make sure to remember names. Listening,
beautiful.
Lori asking for input, Mary saying hello, let everyone speak and say them correctly. That's good. Know the pronunciation. We run into that a lot, especially with a global audience. And I'll tell you what, I've gotten a lot of names wrong.
Yeah.
And so I always try to make a point of that and apologizing if I mess it up and hopefully learning the correct pronunciation.
Yeah.
Making sure that everyone feels heard. When in a meeting where there are men and women, avoid using only guys. Guys, I just did it again. I'm guilty of that even today. So I'm working on that. So know that. I've got a few comments in the chat about it. So everyone, I apologize for that. I'm trying to be better. Be on time in meetings.
Yeah.
Smile as people enter.
Yeah.
This is great.
Refrain from sidebar conversations, Derek. Nice point. Because the sidebar conversation, it sends a message that you're excluding others, right? So, and it's very visible. Yeah, that's a great comment.
Looking people in the eye.
Okay. Okay, so the power of this is that we're trying to get early wins by focusing on just a few concrete things. And in this case, it has to go back to behavior. And remember the original principle, we're going to behave until we believe, at least for those who have not crossed a threshold of conviction. They need practice, and then they need to see the results of what they're doing. Okay, excellent. Let's go to stage two. 3 behaviors for stage 2, learner safety. What concrete behaviors could we implement to give us early momentum, to give us wins in the early stage for learner safety? What would help us understand that we can learn and we're not going to be embarrassed or marginalized in the learning process? What ideas do you have? Go to your chat box for this one.
Brianna, share failures. Reward intelligent failure. Be curious in order to model safety. Tim, I like that one. Michelle, admit to your own mistakes. Offer mentorship. Luis, that's a great one.
Yeah.
Curiosity is primary. It's so true. If there's an overwhelming sense of curiosity, I think that goes a long way.
Yeah, I think, Junior, that curiosity comes across as compassionate.
Yeah.
Rather than judgmental.
Yeah.
That's what I've always experienced.
That's been super helpful for me in cultural differences. I've noticed if people show curiosity to me, or I show curiosity to someone else who may have different mannerisms or customs or whatever else, that goes a really long way. If someone says, hey, why do you do this? That's interesting to me. Can you help me understand a little bit more about why you might you do this, or you have this habit, or whatever else?
Yeah.
I could never be offended by that,
Right. Right.
and to me, I'm like, wow, thank you for asking. I'd love to share with you why.
I like this. Chet offers, oh man, I'm losing it. I worked at a company where most junior people offered opinions first and were supported, not cut down.
Mm,
So they provided an opportunity to be included and also learn when you are incorrect without being shamed,
mm, yeah.
right?
Yep.
That's a great one.
Yep. Clear
Okay,
expectations and agreement. Listen. These are all good.
let's go to stage 3, contributor safety. What specific concrete behaviors would send the message, send clear signals that you're free and able to contribute, right? You shouldn't fear contribution. You shouldn't fear weighing in and contributing all that you can. What do you think here?
Celebrate the messenger.
Okay.
You ask everyone for their feedback and suggestions. Listen. Align on goals and give explicit freedom on how to achieve them. Follow up on contributions.
Mm-hmm. Reward failures. That comes up again and again and again.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Acknowledge contributions which are risky. I like that one.
That is fantastic.
Yeah.
I love that. What a great insight. Yeah. That's really good.
Ooh, this one's good. Hard on issues, soft on people. Love
Love it. I
love
love
that.
it. Yeah.
And so I'm sorry if I miss your names or I kind of interpret the last 2 or 3 words of your comment. I'm just trying to keep up with the scrolling here.
That's
Thank
fantastic.
people, show interest. Show them that they have a stake in the result. Dean, that's great. Close the loop. Brianna, that comes up a lot. We hear that a lot from people. Like, even like, we understand that this is a large and complex organization and you can't do everything for everybody, but if you could at least acknowledge, what I said and close the loop on it, even if it's a no-go,
Yeah.
that's important.
Yeah. That's absolutely true. Let's go to stage 4 because stage 4 is perhaps the most fascinating one and the most difficult one, right? So what specific behaviors would you recommend to signal to the team or the organization that we're trying to create challenger safety, that it's okay to challenge the status quo? You can do that. What would you say?
Go ahead and throw it in there. Celebrate those who do.
Yeah.
Ask for it. Assign dissent. Ryan, let's go. Let's go. That's great. We talk
We
about that one a lot.
we love that. We love that.
Celebrate questions. Ask, what am I missing here? Take the suggestions. Listen to ideas and take them seriously.
Mhm.
So there's this theme of follow-up in a couple of these stages that's coming through that I think is interesting, right? Ask and then mean it.
Yeah, ask and mean it. Yeah, I love that. After
Devil's
action
advocate.
reviews, fantastic, like a post-mortem, right?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Give permission. People need to know that they have permission. In the book, we talk about air cover for candor, right? That's the social exchange. That's the reciprocity
Yeah.
at this stage. But it's how do you do it? You have to operationalize it into behavior. And that's what we're talking about here. Oh, I love this. Who's saying that? Kim. Publicly change your opinion.
I like that a lot.
That's fantastic.
Yeah,
That's
that's
fantastic.
really good.
Yeah. You're doing it in front of everybody and they're seeing that you're changing and it's okay.
Yeah,
I love that.
these are
Don't
great.
get angry at disruptors, embrace them. Hey, everyone, think about think about innovation for a minute. Innovation by its very nature is disruptive of the status quo. It undermines the status quo. So how can you create an incubator of innovation if you don't create the psychological safety that protects people in the behavior that they need to innovate? So we need this. We need challenger safety if we're going to innovate on any kind of a sustained basis,
Mhm.
right? Any others here getting your attention?
No, I think we can move on.
Okay, fantastic. Okay, so we're going to kind of summarize. Every single one of you is a cultural architect. And it doesn't matter if you're an individual contributor or the CEO, it doesn't matter. You're still a cultural architect. Now, by virtue of position, you may have more positional power, and we have to acknowledge that. But you still contribute to the culture. If you're a member of the organization, you still have a stewardship as a cultural architect, regardless of what your position is. So how do we create a culture? Well, there's three steps here that I think are important. A pattern of thought or behavior in a person is a habit. So we all have habits at an individual level. And those habits are behavioral and they are observable, right? If we're going to change a culture, we have to work backwards. We have to go back to the individual as the unit of analysis. And we have to say, oh, we have habits. And we start there. We start by changing habits. A pattern of thought or behavior on a team is then a norm, right? It becomes a shared norm. There's a pattern in our habits among a group of people. And then a collection of norms in an organization becomes a culture. So you can see the build from the individual to the team to the organization. This is how it works. And we all have a hand and a role in doing that. Any comment there, Junior?
I think acknowledging that we all have responsibility is so important. And I alluded to this before, but it's very easy to look at anything, look at any society, any team, any person, and say, I wouldn't do that way, or this is blatantly wrong, or I can't believe that you did this. And we throw our hands up and we just kind of point our fingers. And it's important that we all take responsibility for what we do and acknowledge that we're imperfect people. Society is an imperfect organization. The organizations in which we work are imperfect, but there is a way to improve the situation, and we are all the solution. And as we change in aggregate, that makes huge difference at the organizational level. And so if you're a leader of people, and even in peer relationships, the same thing applies. But let's look at ourselves in view of all that we've talked about today and ask, what can we do better? Not what can everybody else do better? What can we do better? Let's be real. We're imperfect and we have things that we need to improve. We're all on a journey together, and thankfully we have incredible resources at our disposal to improve. And one of the things that we want to do for all of you is provide the cutting edge research, the latest that we've done, as well as the contributions that everyone else has made. We want to acknowledge the contributions of all the researchers and everyone who's done, research and put content into this category. There's a lot of great work out there. And so I would just say we are cultural architects of our workplace, and we're cultural architects of the world. Our societies at large, we build them, we make them up. So let's do better, and let's do everything we can.
Junior, I want to call out a point that Simone has made, which is so crucial. She said, I love the term stewardship, but it's often misunderstood.
Hmm.
We are the caretaker as much as the creator.
Yeah.
So the stewardship crosses the line, kind of bleeds between both of those. We have to create, but then we have to caretake, which means that we sustain it, we reinforce it, we keep it going, we cultivate it, and we foster it. So if but if the culture needs to change, right, then our stewardship becomes one of creating and transforming. And that's not
Mhm.
an easy thing to do.
Yeah. Tim, anything else before we wrap up and I kind of let people know what we have going on and as well as the giveaway?
No, go right ahead. Thanks very much.
Excellent. So, just a couple things I wanted to point out. I'll share my screen just briefly with you to show you what I was talking about before with the website. So, here, leaderfactor.com/blog, you can pop into each of these, look at the stages, learn a little bit more. You can also learn more about the book, but we've got the full webinars linked, timestamps, and all of the content in here. So, if you thought that the 4 stages was interesting and it was your first time with us, this is a resource available to you. Also, if you've hung around, you have an opportunity to win free access to the 4 stages team survey and run it with your team, where we send out invitations. We ask a 12-item assessment with some open-ended questions, and we report out on that data at the intact level to show the level of psychological safety along with recommendations. You can track it over time. This is a really neat tool if you haven't been exposed to it yet. So what we would love for you to do is follow the instructions that Ben just posted in the chat to be entered into that giveaway. We've run this with several teams in the giveaway in the past, and it's just a really, really cool way to do this and gain access to this tool. Another thing I wanted to make you aware of is in the website, if you go into certifications, you'll see both EQometer and 4 stages. If you're interested in becoming certified in the 4 stages, you're welcome to come here and learn a little bit more about it. I will spend just 2 more minutes on this. I know we're 1 minute over, and I'm going to kind of transition away from the webinar to tell you what we offer as an organization. So if you don't want to hang around, don't worry at all. But if you do, I'll just tell you what's going on here. So the certification is for those inside organizations and third-party consultants to be able to train psychological safety using the 4 stages model. You can come to this page and watch a video overview about what's included, what the agenda is, the materials that you get access to, what the process is, the book, etc. We highly recommend that if you are doing psychological safety, either as a consultant or inside your corporation, that you check this out. We've had about close to 200 go through this year. We have a global network of Leader Factor certified trainers and coaches, and we have just 10 seats left for the February session. The January session is sold out. So if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us. The last thing I want to say is this is our last webinar of the year. So for all of you who have been with us in multiple webinars, I've seen many of you in the chat. Just thank you. Thank you for everything that you've done to support our work and engage with us this year. It's been absolutely a ride. The book came out just in March, and we've made so much progress in this area with your help. I feel like the Leader Factor network and community has just become, something that we probably didn't anticipate earlier this year, just how much engagement and great feedback we would get. So thank you, everyone, for your contribution. We invite you back. We hold webinars very regularly. And so keep an eye out. You'll be getting an email with a recording of this webinar and an invitation to join the LinkedIn group. You can follow us there. So I guess the last thing I want to say is just thank you. Tim, anything else? You're on mute. Tim, I think you're on mute.
Yeah, no, I just want to say thanks as well. It's a global family. We appreciate you being with us, and have a wonderful holiday season. Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah, whatever your religious or metaphysical tradition is. We wish you all the best.
Thanks, everybody. Talk next year. Bye-bye.